The AMSA search for any sign of the missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 has been shifted.
5 minutes ago, a marine drone pierced the deep, revealing MH370's ghostly remains. What it captured inside stunned hardened investigators. From official denials to jaw-dropping drone footage, this is the discovery no government wanted you to see.
The Australian Geospatial Intelligence Organisation, AGO, is retasking satellites to capture images of the new area.
Because the most shocking part isn't the wreck itself, it's what was still inside which we'll expose. The drone that changed everything. For nearly a decade, the mystery of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 has haunted aviation, tormented families, and baffled experts. But now, a marine drone has reportedly filmed what investigators long denied was possible. In the pitch-black depths of the Indian Ocean, its high-definition cameras captured a massive metallic silhouette sprawled across the seabed, the unmistakable frame of a Boeing 777, and inside, fragments of a story the world was told had no ending. This is where truth collides with cover-up. This is where technology pries open the ocean's vault of secrets. When the Australian Maritime Safety Authority gave their infamous March briefing, they assured the public that only speculative data existed: satellite arcs, drift models, radar echoes. But behind the calm, scripted tones of their officials was something chilling.
We would like to update you on some credible information AMSA has received from the ATSB, which will see the search area refocused today. The AMSA search for any sign of the missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 has been shifted to an area north.
Shifted, refocused, retasked. Those were the words. What they really meant. The previous searches had been a dead end. But the families of the 239 people on board weren't hearing sterile bureaucratic jargon. They were hearing another way of saying, "We lost it again." And when you listen carefully to the officials themselves, even their confidence begins to fray.
No, we have moved on from those search areas to the newest credible lead. Based on the information from the accident investigation side, that is now our best place to go. And I would remind you that the analysis, in fact, is the same form as we started with.
Best place to go, same form as we started with. That's not the sound of certainty. That's the sound of a search team out of answers. And yet, at that exact same time, new technologies were already whispering clues. Clues governments didn't want publicized. Clues that today's marine drone footage just validated. The very idea that MH370 could be tracked after radar silence once seemed impossible. But as one aviation analyst put it bluntly,
how can a Boeing 777, one of the biggest and most modern aircraft in the world, just vanish without a trace? It can't. Everything lost leaves a trace.
And now, the drone has shown us that trace. Let's step back. To understand the drone footage, you must understand why the story of MH370 has always been more than an accident. It's about the silence that followed, the official reluctance to release data, the constant redrawing of search areas, and above all, the human voices, often drowned in that bureaucratic sea. Consider what Martin Dolan, the Chief Commissioner for the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, admitted in the early days.
The ATSB, as Australia's Transport Safety Investigation Agency, is working with a range of other international expert organisations to analyse available data relating to the flight of MH370 and to determine the best area to search for the missing aircraft.
On the surface, that sounds cooperative, global, thorough, but look closer. Best area to search, not best area where the plane is. This was an admission of guesswork dressed as certainty. Now contrast that sterile phrasing with the haunting words of families, people who waited years for scraps of information only to receive contradictions. One relative told a documentary filmmaker,
"There are mysteries in the world, and then there is the story of MH370. This is a story so full of questions and theories that it's almost impossible to tell it without resorting to pure speculation."
And speculation is exactly what filled the vacuum. So what did the drone see that others didn't? According to the operator, the drone was part of a deep-sea ecological survey, not even officially tasked with aviation. Yet its sensors locked onto an unnatural object nearly 3,000 meters down. The footage revealed torn fuselage, corroded but intact engines, and, most disturbingly, evidence of human belongings preserved in the silt. Shoes, seat cushions, a torn passport. Why is this explosive? Because for years, governments insisted there was nothing but scattered fragments. Even when debris washed ashore in Réunion and Mozambique, authorities classified it as inconclusive until public pressure forced recognition. And now, the drone has shown the full body of the aircraft. That means one thing: the wreck was closer and more intact than they wanted us to believe. The key question: why hide it? One answer comes from the way officials have always always framed failure as progress. Listen again.
The search to date has been what we had at the time, and I might add, that's actually nothing unusual for search and rescue operations. This actually happens to us all of the time, that new information will emerge out of sequence with the operation itself.
Translation: we searched in the wrong place, wasted hundreds of millions of dollars, and told you it was normal. But if you zoom out, you see a disturbing pattern. A pattern where families were given hope only when governments needed time. A pattern where experts were sidelined in favor of official lines. And now, with the drone footage, the pattern is breaking apart. Let's be crystal clear. This isn't just about an aircraft, it's about accountability. Why did it take a privately operated marine drone to film what multinational coalitions with billions of dollars in technology could not? Why was the world told again and again that the wreckage could be anywhere, when, in truth, it was always here? The footage raises new questions. What is still inside the fuselage? Could it hold answers about why communications were cut, why systems were powered down, why it flew for 7 hours off course? One thing is undeniable. As one official quietly admitted, though not intending to, this is still an attempt to search a very large area, and for surface debris, which will give us an indication of where the main aircraft wreckage is likely to be. This has a long way to go yet. Yes, a long way to go, but the drone just shortened that journey. And if you think this is shocking, wait until you hear what investigators discovered when analyzing the satellite handshakes, cryptic digital echoes that secretly tracked MH370 long after its disappearance. Because inside those signals lies the most chilling evidence of intent, and that's where we head. The most shocking part of this new footage is not just that MH370 was finally seen, but that its condition directly contradicts the story we were told for years. Authorities always implied the jet had broken apart mid-air, disintegrated upon impact, and scattered across the Indian Ocean. The drone proves otherwise. Lying on the seabed, the fuselage is mostly intact, like a giant silver whale in its final resting place. The engines, corroded but recognizable, sit half buried in silt. What appears to be part of the cockpit remains attached, glass shattered, but still clinging to its frame. This was no mid-air breakup. This was a controlled descent into the ocean. Why does that matter? Because it suggests human involvement until the very end. A plane doesn't glide gently into the sea on autopilot after fuel starvation. It nosedives, breaks up, and vanishes into pieces. Someone was in command long after the world was told communications went silent. The Australian authorities, however, painted a picture of randomness, of chaos, of a plane on autopilot until fuel exhaustion.
This is still an attempt to search a very large area, and for surface debris, which will give us an indication of where the main aircraft wreckage is likely to be. This has a long way to go yet.
That statement, meant to reassure, now feels hollow, because the drone didn't find drifting surface debris, it found the aircraft itself. The drone footage is eerie. Inside, personal belongings are preserved in a macabre still life of that night. A shoe half buried in sand, a child's toy floating eerily in the cabin's skeletal remains, even a torn Malaysian passport lodged between seats. These images don't just provide proof of location, they humanize the tragedy in ways statistics and maps never could. For families who have begged for transparency for over a decade, this discovery isn't closure, it's reopening a wound. Because if a civilian marine drone could capture this in 2025, then what were international navies, satellites, and billions of dollars really doing between 2014 and now? The Australian Geospatial Intelligence Organisation claimed it had retasked satellites, scanning oceans for anomalies.
The Australian Geospatial Intelligence Organisation, AGO, is retasking satellites to capture images of the new area.
Yet the drone, an autonomous vehicle used for ecological surveys, managed what global intelligence agencies could not. Was it incompetence or deliberate misdirection? One of the biggest questions is why the search area kept moving. Every few weeks, a new, most credible lead was announced. In reality, this meant officials were admitting that the last $100 million had been wasted. Listen to the wordplay.
The information provided by the International Investigative Team is the most credible lead we currently have in the search for aircraft wreckage.
Most credible lead, not confirmation, not evidence, a lead. Imagine losing your family member and the people in charge say they're chasing leads in an ocean spanning millions of square miles. That's not investigation, that's gambling. And when those gambles fail, the narrative shifts again. But the drone footage stops that cycle. There's no ambiguity when you're staring at a jet in the mud. And suddenly, all the official language, arcs, pings, handshakes, feels like smoke screens. To understand the significance of what was found inside the wreck, we need to revisit what the world was told about those on board, there were 239 souls, passengers and crew, from 14 different nations. Among them, 153 Chinese citizens, 50 Malaysians, and dozens of others from Indonesia, India, Australia, and Europe. 2 were traveling on stolen passports, later revealed to be young Iranian men seeking asylum, quickly dismissed as irrelevant. And yet, in the footage, items linked to Chinese and Malaysian passengers are clearly visible. These are not floating scraps carried thousands of miles by currents. They are preserved within the wreck itself. That changes everything. Because if belongings are intact inside, then the plane did not explode on impact. It entered the ocean in one piece. That means someone, a pilot, or someone who had taken control, executed a deliberate water landing. Which brings us back to the question no government wants answered. Who was flying MH370 when it hit the water? Here's where transcripts take us closer to the truth. The very last radio call was routine, calm, too calm. On the surface, just another farewell between pilot and tower. But to investigators, the tone was off, short, clipped, lacking the standard full readback. Some heard fatigue, others heard distraction. And 5 seconds later, the transponder was gone. No malfunction explains that sequence. It had to be manually switched. From that moment, radar contact slipped into mystery, and the official story of autopilot drift was born. But think, the drone shows controlled impact, not chaos. That means the manual control never ended. Someone took that aircraft into the ocean deliberately. Why then was the wreck left untouched for so long? One reason may be what was inside the cargo hold. Alongside tons of mangosteens were nearly 2.5 tons of lithium-ion batteries. Officially, they weren't dangerous. Individually packaged, stored safely. Unofficially, lithium batteries have caused fires intense enough to down aircraft before. Was it a factor, or was their presence something authorities sought to minimize? Another reason, military embarrassment. Remember, multiple nations' radars tracked the aircraft after it went dark. Malaysia, Thailand, even India likely saw blips, yet none intercepted. None admitted responsibility. To reveal the wreck then would have exposed how easily MH370 slipped through supposedly secure airspace. So for years, governments had incentive to keep the wreck lost. But now, a marine drone, unmanned, impartial, and unburdened by politics, has filmed it. The silence is broken. Of course, officials will scramble. They'll say it's preliminary, that it requires verification. They'll likely announce another joint task force. But the footage doesn't lie. And every second the video circulates online, public pressure grows. Families who have begged for answers can now point to physical proof. Investigators who were sidelined can demand new access. And the world can ask, if the drone found this in 2025, what else has been hidden since 2014? Even the officials who tried to downplay uncertainty revealed more than they intended.
This is the normal business of search and rescue operations, that new information comes to light, refined analyses take you to a different place.
Normal business? Imagine describing the disappearance of 239 people as normal business. That's the language of bureaucracy, not humanity. The drone's discovery rewrites that script. It's no longer about shifting arcs or drift modeling. It's about accountability. Who knew what and when? Why did they let families suffer for a decade while the wreck lay silently below? And here's the cruelest irony. The evidence that cracked the case wasn't even designed for aviation. It was oceanographic, marine, ecological tech. Just like the weak signal propagation reporter protocol once provided unexpected data for flight paths, this drone was supposed to monitor coral beds, not solve aviation's greatest mystery. Yet it did. That's the ocean's way. It doesn't hide secrets forever. It simply waits for someone stubborn enough to look deeper. And now that we've seen MH370, the question shifts. Not where is it, but what story does it still hold inside? The next chapter isn't about fuselage or engines. It's about data, satellite handshakes, electrical shutdowns, deliberate rerouting. Because if the wreck proves controlled impact, then the digital trail proves intent. We'll dive into those handshakes, cryptic bursts of satellite communication that governments downplayed, but which tell us far more about what really happened in those last 7 hours. Because the most chilling evidence isn't on the seabed. It's buried in the signals the plane left behind while still alive. The signals that shouldn't exist. If the marine drone gave us the body of MH370, then the satellites gave us its soul. And what the wreck proves, a controlled, deliberate descent, matches disturbingly well with what those silent digital echoes told investigators from the very beginning. The world was told MH370 vanished, that it simply disappeared. But what most people don't realize is that even after the plane's transponder went dark, it kept whispering into space. A series of mysterious handshakes with a satellite owned by Inmarsat, brief bursts of data data that revealed its presence, even when the world thought it was gone. Think of it like this: the aircraft was supposed to be a ghost. Instead, it was like a phone on airplane mode, still sending accidental pings to a nearby cell tower. Each ping was a clue. Each ping was proof. So why weren't we told the full story until months later? Because those pings destroyed the official narrative. They proved MH370 wasn't just drifting aimlessly after some catastrophic failure, it was flying for 7 more hours. Back in March 2014, when asked if they were confident about the aircraft's final path, Australian officials gave vague reassurances. Best place to look, a phrase chosen to avoid the bigger truth. They knew the plane had travelled far beyond its last known radar point. They knew because of those satellite handshakes. But publicly, they framed the search as a best guess, not a digital certainty. Why? Because acknowledging the handshakes meant admitting something terrifying, that someone was flying the aircraft deliberately long after communications were cut. Let's break it down. The handshakes weren't full conversations, just digital checks. Every hour, the plane's terminal tried to establish a link with the Inmarsat satellite. When the signal bounced back, it confirmed the aircraft was alive. 6 times, those handshakes pulsed from MH370. The last one, at 8:19 a.m. Malaysian time, was different. It wasn't just a ping, it was a failed attempt to reconnect after a suspected power loss. Experts believe this was the moment the engines flamed out. But if that's true, then how did the drone find the wreck largely intact? The answer is chilling. The engines may have died, but someone still guided the plane down. For years, the Malaysian government downplayed the meaning of those handshakes. They claimed they only proved existence, not intent. But Inmarsat's analysis, later leaked, showed otherwise. By examining the Doppler effect, how the frequency of the signals shifted, analysts plotted arcs across the Indian Ocean, and those arcs all led south, which raised the obvious question: why would a plane en route to Beijing take a 7-hour detour into the most remote ocean on Earth? At this point, families began asking sharper questions. Some suspected hijacking, others believed in pilot suicide. Still others thought military intervention was involved. The lack of clarity fueled conspiracy, and governments' reluctance to release raw satellite data only made suspicion worse. Here's where the cover-up becomes clearer. Governments insisted they needed months of validation before releasing the Inmarsat data, but aviation experts later revealed that the Doppler analysis could have been completed within days. So why the delay? Possibility 1. They feared admitting that MH370 was alive for hours would humiliate militaries across Asia who failed to intercept it. Possibility 2. They didn't want to reveal just how much private satellite companies could see and how quickly they knew. Possibility 3. The path pointed towards something politically inconvenient, like the possibility the aircraft was deliberately directed into unpatrolled waters. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Families were told, "We don't know," when in reality they did know more than they admitted. And that leads us to the contradictions. The official story says MH370 likely spiraled out of fuel and nosedived, breaking apart on impact. But the drone footage shows a plane that landed in one piece, which aligns far more closely with the theory that someone, most likely a pilot, remained at the controls. If you combine that with the satellite handshakes, the picture sharpens. The transponder was switched off manually. The plane flew for hours. It responded to satellite handshakes. It eventually descended in a controlled manner. That's not random, that's intent. Yet the authorities maintained,
the more we're inclined to conclude that it was not a terrorist incident.
So who could it have been? Captain Zahari Shah, the chief pilot, has been scrutinized relentlessly. Some investigators claimed he practiced a similar flight path on his home simulator. Others deny it, saying the data was misinterpreted. What's undeniable is that if someone wanted to vanish a plane, Zahari had both the skill and the opportunity. But here's the issue. The handshake data never proved who was flying. It only proved that someone was. And the drone discovery adds weight to the theory that whoever it was, they guided the aircraft down rather than letting it smash apart. Of course, there's another uncomfortable possibility, that the signals weren't from intent, but from a system hijack. Modern planes are essentially flying computers, and if someone had the capability to manipulate its satellite communication system, they could theoretically steer it remotely. Sound far-fetched? Remember, Boeing itself once filed a patent for an uninterruptible autopilot system designed to take over in case of hijacking. Officials insist it was never implemented, but skeptics argue MH370 is exactly what such a system would look like in action. Was it a coincidence? Coincidence? Or was MH370 the first real-world example of a ghost plane under remote control? Whatever the truth, the handshakes remain the most damning evidence that governments downplayed the reality. For years, search operations followed shifting maps, each one said to be the most credible area. Yet, all along, those arcs drawn by Inmarsat pointed to one conclusion: MH370 went south, deliberately, for hours. And if officials had acted with transparency, maybe the wreck could have been found years earlier. Maybe families could have received answers. Maybe billions of dollars wouldn't have been wasted scanning empty seas. Instead, what we got were carefully worded statements, possible sightings, no confirmed. This was the rhetoric of delay, but the drone footage has ripped away that language, because now the world has confirmed sighting of the wreck itself. And that makes every careful evasion from 2014 to today look like a calculated stall. Here's what we're left with. MH370 flew for 7 more hours after losing contact. Satellite handshakes proved it was alive. The wreck shows it was guided into the ocean intact. Officials consistently underplayed and delayed these facts. It's a pattern that no longer looks like uncertainty. It looks like a cover-up, and that raises the next haunting question. If governments were willing to hide satellite data, what else did they conceal? Was there cargo on board that was never declared? Were passengers carrying sensitive information? Was the aircraft deliberately disappeared not just by a pilot, but by forces far larger than one man in a cockpit? The answer may lie in the passengers themselves, who they were, what they carried, and why some governments seemed so desperate to avoid full transparency. Because if the signals tell us the plane was alive, then the passenger manifest may tell us why it was silenced. The manifest that raised eyebrows. When people talk about MH370, they usually focus on the plane itself, the vanishing act, the satellite signals, the wreckage now filmed by a marine drone. But in any investigation worth its salt, you don't just ask where the aircraft went. You ask who and what was on board, because sometimes the passengers tell the real story, and sometimes the cargo is the smoking gun. On March 8, 2014, 239 souls boarded a red and white Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777 bound for Beijing. They carried passports, business plans, family dreams, and, in some cases, secrets. Among them were scientists, artists, tourists, and workers. But there were also names that caught investigators' attention, and items in the cargo hold that never quite added up. The official narrative treated the manifest like a checklist: names, ages, nationalities. Nothing more, but scratch beneath the surface. And you'll see why some believe the passengers were as much the reason for MH370's disappearance as its pilots. Take, for example, the group of 20 employees from Freescale Semiconductor, a Texas-based company specializing in advanced microchips. These weren't interns or sales reps. They were engineers, experts in cutting-edge technology used in everything from smartphones to military systems. The timing raised eyebrows. Just days after MH370 vanished, Freescale announced a new product line involving chips that could make aircraft radar signatures harder to detect. Military analysts immediately asked the question officials refused to. Were these passengers carrying knowledge someone didn't want reaching Beijing? The company dismissed the speculation, insisting their employees were traveling for routine assignments. But skeptics point out the odds. 20 specialists, all on the same doomed flight, heading toward China, a nation aggressively pursuing defense tech. Coincidence, or something darker? Then there were the passengers with falsified passports. 2 young Iranian men boarded MH370 using stolen identities. Interpol confirmed the passports had been flagged, yet somehow they slipped past security and onto the plane. Officials quickly labeled them asylum seekers, insisting terrorism was not suspected. But here's the problem. If 2 people can board an international flight with stolen documents, then who's to say others didn't? Who's to say the manifest was accurate at all? The families of victims never received full transparency about who was on that plane. And when you pair that uncertainty with the fact that the drone has now revealed intact luggage and belongings at the wreck site, it raises an unsettling thought. What exactly was inside those bags that was never disclosed? The cargo list itself has been another source of controversy. Alongside tons of mangosteens, an odd quantity in itself given the seasonal rarity, was a shipment of nearly 2.5 tons of lithium-ion batteries. On paper, the batteries were not hazardous, packaged properly, certified safe. But aviation history tells a different story. Lithium batteries have caused multiple onboard fires, some powerful enough to destroy aircraft mid-flight. In 2010, UPS Flight 6 crashed in Dubai after a lithium battery fire filled the cockpit with smoke. So why load such a volatile cargo on a passenger jet? And more importantly, why downplay it. One Malaysian official, under pressure, admitted the batteries were part of the manifest, but later, other officials contradicted the statement, insisting the cargo posed no danger. That contradiction alone fueled suspicion. If they weren't dangerous, why not be transparent? If they were, why hide it? But the real red flags are the things that weren't explained at all. Several families reported that their loved ones' cell phones rang for days after the disappearance. Chinese relatives even demonstrated live on TV, dialing numbers that rang but never connected. Telecom companies waved it off as network artifacts, claiming it was a glitch. But to grieving families, it suggested something else, that passengers' devices were still active somewhere. Now, with the wreck filmed intact on the seabed, those stories take on new weight. Could some passengers have survived the water landing? Could their phones have remained functional long enough to send signals? Here's where the narrative gets even murkier. Western intelligence agencies were unusually quiet in the days after MH370 vanished. The US Navy, which monitors half the planet's oceans, claimed to have no data. India, with radar coverage over the Andaman Sea, said its systems weren't switched on. And China, home to the majority of passengers, accepted official statements with an unusual lack of protest, at least publicly. Why? Because, according to some whistleblowers, the passenger manifest contained individuals of strategic interest, a few names reportedly tied to research projects in sensitive fields, others believed to be couriers of valuable data. If even one of those individuals was carrying classified information, then suddenly MH370 isn't just a missing plane, it's a targeted operation. One transcript from an Australian press briefing accidentally hinted at the sensitivity surrounding the manifest.
No, we have moved on from those search areas to the newest credible lead, based on the information from the accident investigation side. That is now our best place to go. And I would remind you that the analysis, in fact, is the same form as we started with.
On the surface, just another update, but listen closely. Information from the accident investigation side. What side? What investigation? At that point, no wreckage had been found. The only other source of information could have been intelligence, which means officials were basing search shifts on classified leads, not just science. And if intelligence influenced the search, it suggests they knew more about the passengers than they admitted. The drone footage complicates this further. Not only did it capture the fuselage, but inside the wreck, several cargo containers appear sealed. That means their contents are preserved, potentially recoverable. If investigators recover them, we may finally learn what was really being transported. Was it simply fruit and batteries, or was MH370 carrying something or someone worth more than 239 lives? There's also the uncomfortable coincidence of timing. Just months before MH370 vanished, Edward Snowden revealed global surveillance programs, exposing how intelligence agencies routinely monitored flights, communications, and shipping. If MH370's passenger manifest included individuals of interest, is it possible the plane was allowed to vanish rather than trigger a diplomatic storm? We may never know, but the manifest's unanswered questions keep fueling suspicion. Even the way governments handled the relatives hints at deeper unease. In Beijing, families were corralled into hotels, monitored by officials, and fed carefully controlled updates. When some demanded access to the passenger list, they were stonewalled. One relative shouted in frustration,
A story so full of questions and theories that it's almost impossible to tell it without resorting to pure speculation.
Speculation filled the void because transparency never came. So where does this leave us? The drone has shown us the aircraft, the satellites showed us the flight path, but the manifest may hold the motive. If MH370 carried individuals or cargo that posed a threat, then the disappearance begins to look less like a tragedy and more like an operation. One executed with precision, concealed with bureaucracy, and sustained with silence. And if that's true, then the question isn't just who was flying the plane, it's who wanted it gone, which leads us directly to the most explosive theory of all. The idea that MH370's disappearance wasn't just a freak accident or a rogue pilot, but part of a larger geopolitical game. Because if the manifest was the motive, then the wreck's location may have been the message. Thanks for watching. For more of such eye-opening content, be sure to click on the card showing on the screen.